Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me for a little extra time today, Michael Oliver. You know, a lot of you folks have been complaining, and you see things on the YouTube channel, lots of complaints there about, Taylor, you just should shut up a little bit and let Michael talk. I mean, you're just expressing too many of your own views. What do you think this is? You think it's your show or what? And no, they're right. I should tone it down a little bit and let my guests do the talking. So I'm really glad that you could join me again, Michael. Thanks for allowing us a little extra time today.
Thank you, Jay. Glad to be back.
Well, it really is true. You are one of the more popular guests, and you don't get that much time to talk. So today we're a little extra time. But I'd like to start out because most people hear you talking about the gold market, the silver market, the equity and bond markets and currency markets and commodity markets. You talk about those things briefly and give us an idea of which direction they're heading and all. Some vague ideas about the limits and where you think you need to see things move further. But what people don't know about you is that there's another dimension, a much broader dimension than just what they hear on this show. And that is your views of government and markets and the economy and so forth. And you've written an excellent book. It's called The New Libertarianism, Anarcho-Capitalism. Can you give our listeners just a little bit of an overview of the book and the philosophy that's contained within the book and the ideas within that book?
Well, it goes back to my high school days. That's been the 1960s. I read Ayn Rand. I started with their smallest novel, Anthem. Being a cheater, I started the small one, and I worked my way up to Atlas Shrugged, and it influenced me heavily. And she's not just a novelist, she's a philosopher, and a rebellious one at that, in terms of contrasting with philosophies that have dominated the world over the last couple thousand years. Anyway, I got it because of that. I got involved in the early phase of what was the emergent libertarian movement in the United States, which would be in the late 60s, early 1970s. And I was editor and publisher of a nationwide newspaper called The New Banner. It was a libertarian/objectivist publication. And in the process of that, I got to meet Dr. Murray Rothbard. Now, who's Rothbard? Rothbard is the primary student of Ludwig von Mises, who's the father of the Austrian School of Economics. A very laissez-faire, limited government type school, though Rothbard took it a step further. He was for the evolution of government out of the way, totally, in the markets to ascend. Not that you do that suddenly, but it evolves because it's a natural course of events, let's say. He was involved with Ayn Rand. He was part of her inner circle that was humorously called the Collective. Greenspan was part of that group, and Nathaniel Brandon, but also Rothbard. But Rothbard was later kicked out by Rand, and he was not for limited government as Rand was. Rand was basically a founding fathers type of adherent. She came over from Russia, and she was very much in love with the work that the founding fathers had done in terms of limiting government and so forth. Well, in my book, one of the subjects, the main subject I deal with is who's right. The libertarians right in the evolution away from government, or the limited government folks right. And Rand was in the limited government group, and she definitely didn't like the libertarians. She thought they were a bunch of hippies. Okay, so it was a sharp division then. But in the book, I basically marry the two. I take Rand's basic philosophical premises, metaphysics, epistemology, on up, and then, but instead of applying her political philosophy, which basically was a replication of the founding fathers, I apply Rothbard's view of government and why it shouldn't exist and why it is dysfunctional. And so I marry the two, and that's what's called why the book is titled the way it is. Anyway, that influenced me. I wrote that book back in 1971, 72, and 73 as a master's thesis. And I later published it in 2013 through Amazon, and the Mises Institute reviewed it, and I'm very happy to say they liked it very much. And I have great high respect for Jeff Deist, I think, was on the program earlier, and the other team members around him, Mark Thornton and Dave Gordon, who does the reviews. But anyway, so that influenced me heavily in the direction of my life. I was going to go into political philosophy as an academic career, and in 1974-75 decided, I'm going into the futures markets. What a switch. Gold was legalized. That was the reason. And gold is, of course, to a libertarian or to anybody free market, it is money. It is the answer to fiat currencies, which are eternally destroying themselves, and now at a very rapid pace. And so we're now faced with the reality that gold is, at its supreme moment, I think. More so than any bull market we've seen in the last 50 years in gold, this is the one. Not just gold, but silver. And because the major producers of the fiat currencies around the Western world, including Japan, are in the self-destructive mode like we've never seen. And it will have real-world impact, and I think even people who aren't gold bugs, like Buffett, for example, are suddenly realizing that's where they need to be. So we've seen stories in the last few days of Buffett buying into Barrick Gold. But
selling Goldman Sachs. Selling Goldman Sachs, I understand, and buying Barrick Gold, yes.
Yeah, and I think he also sold some Goldman Sachs to buy Barrick Gold.
That's what I mean, yes.
Anyway, so that's what motivated me to get into...
Let me ask you, Michael, if you had gone into academia, so you would have been a libertarian, an objectivist, libertarian type of professor?
At the time, in the mid-'70s, we were in a recession, depression worldwide, if you recall, called stagflation.
Absolutely.
And it was very hard for professors to get tenure and so forth, and I said, I'm not even going to go into the career. I'd finished all my coursework and a PhD and was being objected to by some higher-up professors about my subject matter for my dissertation, and I said, heck with it. University of Hawaii was where I was at the time, and I went back to the mainland and I joined E.F. Hutton in New York City, their headquarters, commodity headquarters, and learned up the ladder about the futures markets, and became a gold specialist under Hutton at the time. That was a couple blocks from where the COMEX was at that time, where they first started trading gold. And by the way, it was libertarians, for the folks who don't know this, committee to legalize gold out of New Orleans. Jim Blanchard ran it at the time. That was the lobby group that got gold legalized. Had it not been for them, they wouldn't be trading right now. So, anyway, so all the events...
I remember, I might just mention, Michael, I remember speaking to the Democratic congressman, whose name escapes me at the moment because it's so many years ago, but I met up with him at an event in New York when that was legalized. It was President Ford was the president, and he signed into law that allowed us to make it legal to own gold again. And the congressman, you might think of who he was, Royce, I believe, Congressman Royce, Democrat, headed up the committee, and he said, Jay, he says, I never could understand why owning an ounce of gold gave you the same kind of penalty as owning crack cocaine. But I suppose that crack cocaine is much less threatening to the establishment than an ounce of gold, perhaps.
Yeah, it probably is. Anyway,
so I'm not surprised
that
somebody objected to your thesis.
That anyway, that's
all right.
That's how I began.
All right, so you were alluding to it. So we're in a bull market of a lifetime. I think there's no question about that for gold and silver, and that's fine. I mean, I'm happy because I have my position. My subscribers have their positions. We see our accounts gaining value, and that's all very good. But what is so troubling are the other things that are going on that are sort of causing this to happen. I mean, the demolition of the currency, Michael. And where is that going to leave us, and where is that going to take us? I mean, we're in a depression now, I think. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Yep, I think so. Politically, I think we're about where the Russians were 1917 through 1990. We're about at 1990 as far as USSR goes. It was only a 70-year span that policy regime lasted, and then it finally collapsed, of course. And even Ayn Rand said, you don't have to go to war against them. They'll collapse on their own. Well, I think the same thing is true with statism in the U.S., which has arisen in an incremental way, brought upon us by both parties, by the way.
Yes,
despite some interruptions by Reagan and thoughts by Goldwater. Basically, the two parties over time have evolved a larger and larger and larger state, no matter what they might say to the contrary. especially the Republicans. And I think Trump has acted as a historic figure here in a negative way, in that he has effectively destroyed what used to be the conservative movement, which was embodied in the GOP, meaning the limited government types, the type that Ayn Rand might appreciate. Let's limit the government. We have separation of powers and so forth and so on. That party's been destroyed. It's now the Trumplican Party. And if you're not with Trump, you're out of the party, basically. And in fact, a lot of the long-term conservatives who've been in Congress for a long time have just quit. They've just not run again.
Yeah, that's
and so
right.
he's destroyed one of the two parties that helped get us to this point. And now the other party is going full swirly into the ideas that have been under that party for a long time anyway, but now are giving full throttle to total statism. They have excuses now, great excuses. So the combination of forces of Trump destroying what was the conservative movement and also being, by the way, a very contradictory individual. A lot of people think, well, he's against regulations and all this stuff. Yeah, fine, but he's also the prime advocate in modern American history of a president advocating the full destruction of the money unit. He's told the Fed to cut rates below zero. He's told them to print the money. Anything it takes to inflate prices to keep things looking good. He's a modern monetary theorist. I see no difference between him and the extreme left on that. And the money unit is an essential thing for social order. If that becomes in question, then social order is in question. Your ability to calculate reality is in question.
Well, we're certainly seeing, the things that Ayn Rand and the Founding Fathers put in place to try to keep our liberties. For example, the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, the right to gather publicly, these kind of things that are being threatened like never before. With COVID-19, it's a serious illness for sure. But there's every indication that Sweden may have done it the right way if you take into consideration everything, not just the number of people that die, but ultimately everything looks like they're coming back to normal in terms of this issue, and they're getting through it without the same kind of damage that we've had. But I want to ask you this, Michael. Earlier today, we watched in our office here Robert Kiyosaki, who said that America is headed for totalitarianism and that he wants to flee this country, wants to get out and take his gold with him. I'm not sure where he's going to go. I don't know what country on earth you can go to that doesn't present the same kind of Marxist totalitarian philosophy. But is he overstating what we might be heading towards, do you think? Probably,
in a sense. There's not many other places to go. And two, I don't think that wrong ideas will survive, just like the Soviet Union did not survive. It collapsed out of its own accord. I even have it on film. There was a CNN night in 1993 where their news people were watching the surrounding of the White House. That's their parliament building.
It took a long time, though, Michael. It took a long time. It took 70 years or whatever for them to fall.
70 years. Well, think about it now. We can go back to Roosevelt if you want, but if you start with LBJ's War on Poverty, which, of course, has never succeeded, just like the war on drugs never succeeded, it's been about 70 years. And we've been evolving more and more toward total statism. A soft, loving type of statism. No jackboots and troops in the streets. Well, maybe not. Maybe we're getting those. But a loving state that controls so many aspects of your life, effectively lobotomizes you because it knows better. But that process has been underway for a long time and getting more intense by the year. And now I think we're reaching the point where you're at the final fulfillment of it, where I strongly suspect Biden will be elected. I think the numbers are just too overwhelming for Trump to overcome. Fine, that's no big deal. Not much difference one way or the other. We're headed in the same direction, but we'll go to a full swirly. This is a Bernie Sanders election, effectively. All his policies are on the table, and that means we go full state socialism, and I suspect that swirly will last about 1 year before it totally implodes in terms of social disorder, inability to calculate, because the money unit is in self-destruction, and all the chaos effects that will swirl off of that. And sometimes it takes pain to have birth, okay?
Yeah, that's right.
And I think the other side of that could very rapidly be, not incrementally, but very rapidly, like chaos theory, where you go into the dark hole and it's over quickly. It doesn't take 20 years to figure out what you did wrong. It takes a few smart people to say, okay, that we've had enough of this. That's it. Now, what could that mean? How would that shape? It could be that some states decide to secede. Don't laugh. Listen for that word secession. It's probably going to come up in the news in 2021, whether it's a county wanting to secede from a state or state wanting to secede from the country. Also, you could have states issue their own money units, perhaps backed by gold, because they want a stable money unit. All kinds of things like that could happen that nobody's thought about, but they would all be reflections of and consequences of the trend that has been in motion for 50, 60, 70 years, finally reaching its denouement, where, it's all over. It didn't work. And so those are good things. So, yes, they're chaos, but chaos is sometimes good.
Yeah, and out of chaos can come order at times, that's for sure. And it takes that kind of misery. I mean, even in relationships sometimes you have to have a big blowout or an argument and, get things off your chest before you can start to have peace and tranquility again. I think that's just sort of the human condition. But so we could be looking. One exploration geologist that's on this show quite often provided his ideas about where we might be headed. He suggested that we might split up into three different countries, perhaps, or more. You'd have the coastals, the West Coast and the East Coast being two different countries, and then something in the middle of the country that would reflect the values of people in those regions. Is that something you think might be possible?
Sure. I think it's entirely possible. I think that it's hard to predict those kind of things, but I can tell that my strong sense is that we're going to get wave effects that nobody thought about, terms that nobody thought about except in history classes when they were in high school, secession, things like that. And I think they'll come rapidly. I think we're also going to have violence more and more. We could also see violence from the right. We haven't seen that so far.
No.
I suspect if gun control gets too martial, at some point you'll have some parts of the country where they say, "Hey, don't try to enforce that law here, or you'll be in trouble." Okay, so it's the kind of thing you want to be prepared for. It's hard to predict what the precise waves will be, but expect chaotic ones. But ultimately, I think they're good because they're tearing up a social order and a political trend direction that does not deserve to survive. Just like Soviet Union did not deserve to survive, so it imploded on itself. So it's just, there's nothing we can do about it. It's a fact of reality that was set in motion by others. So the best thing to do is to protect oneself, and I think one of the best ways to do that is to make sure you don't have more than $250,000 in a bank account at any given bank. Make sure you've got gold and take care of your family.
Yeah. Well, certainly Kamala Harris has suggested, and a lot of people think that she would become the president fairly quickly, perhaps, given the condition of Biden. And she has vowed to take away guns, and virtually everything, all of those protection measures, like getting rid of the Electoral College, getting rid of 2 senators from every state, all those things that were sort of meant to protect the less powerful, amongst us. Take away the guns, of course. Take away the guns. I mean, they knock on the door, and you could see some people not taking too kindly to that move. But Michael, maybe we can get to the markets a little bit. The kind of things that you and I talk about with a few minutes that we have left here. So, I mean, gold has gotten over 2,000. And from what I read, your work is suggesting don't even think about selling that. Don't even think about selling gold. And that sort of reflects what Kawasaki said in his interview. He said gold can go to 10,000, I'd be a buyer. It could go to 24,000, I'd be a buyer. Well, the idea is that the only reason gold's going to those levels is that the currencies are crapping out. There's nothing left of them, right?
And other asset categories. I think the commodity category is about to turn up sharply. The Bloomberg Commodity Index is 1 point away right now from a major breakout in our view by our momentum structural methods. I'm looking at the grains. I'm looking across the board, the energy complex. it's across the board. It's not just one market having an excuse to go up. It's quite a few markets in the commodity complex are turning up without any particular reason. I think the particular reason is a very broad one, and it's not specific to any given market. That is, the commodity category has been beat off the page, has laid on the pavement for 5 years at price levels that are just very low. Look at the grains, for example. It's just not going any lower. The question is, when do they turn up? When do investors say, okay, I've had enough of this high-risk asset called the stock market, which I'm really not quite sure what it's going to do, and I'd rather get into something that is at basement level. And I think that money's starting to move into commodities. And once you see that, then you'll have what the central banks say they've been looking for is some inflation. They're going to get a lot more than they expect, though.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, so that's another place to look. And as far as the stock market goes, I strongly suspect it will go down big after this false rally that we're getting now. I think the S&P is in a wild, broadening pattern, topping pattern since 2018, if you look at the charts. But that's really not the issue. The issue is where's the better place to be, relatively. And I think the commodities and gold are going to beat the pants off of even the U.S. stock market, which is, of course, the strongest developed economy stock market on the planet. Which I think is also the most vulnerable. So it's a matter of moving your assets into the safer places, the most likely places with less risk, more reward. And I think that would now be commodities, which I think will trail the gold trend that's already underway.
All right.
It's like the late 1970s again.
Yeah, it looks a little bit like that's certainly what you're describing. But, Michael, the safety havens are T-bonds and gold, right? Those are the risk-off. The risk-on markets to go to. Now, in a rising inflationary environment, rising commodity environment, can the Fed keep the interest rates down? And if so, how much money do they have to print to try to do that?
Yeah, well, it's sort of self-defeating, isn't it? The long end of the government bond markets we're watching closely, the Japanese government bonds, the bonds in Europe, and the U.S. T-bonds. And I think there's one more surge in them as an avenue of safety for people who are looking for safety outside the stock market. But after that next rally, and I suspect that rally occurs this year, at that point I think the vulnerability on the downside in price, higher yields, gets to be very strong, in which case that alternative will cease to be an alternative. In fact, it'll turn into a negative for the stock market, because if yields start to rise, especially on the longer end, that will be very harmful to the stock market, which will leave one primary alternative left.
Yeah,
gold.
And precious metals and commodities, essentially.
Correct.
All right, that's about all the time we have. I would say that Danielle D. Martino Booth last week pointed out that food prices in the United States have gone up 5.3%. I think she said over 13% in China. So that suggests there are some pressures on the basic cost of staying alive for most people, not the rich people that are making the decisions in Washington and Wall Street, but the common folks, the salt of the earth types that actually do things for the rest of us. And Michael, I want to thank you so much for being with us and spending some extra time with us today. It's always a pleasure to have you, and your insights are always very, very much welcomed and loved here on this show. So thank you so much for being with us, and we'll have you back in a couple of weeks again, hopefully.
Thank you much, Jay. Bye-bye.